Yoav Galant is saying that we are going to have some painful compromises. I wonder what he means by painful compromises. He said that a couple of days ago, and this was published on multiple Israeli media. Galant, painful compromises are required to return the kidnapped to their homes. At the annual commemoration for the victims of the war, Defense Minister Yoav Galant mentioned the achievements in the war in various arenas, and then addressed the issue of the abductees, saying that not everything can be achieved by force and that painful compromises must be made. When do they usually start to speak in this tone? They start to speak in this tone when they are comprehending to a very large extent the fact that they have been indeed defeated and they are unable to achieve any of their military objectives, even through their barbarism. What did he say? In a speech delivered today, Sunday, that was, of course, just a couple of days ago, at the State Memorial in memory of the dead people of the war, Defense Minister Yoav Galant referred to the efforts to return the abductees, saying that not every goal can be achieved militarily and by force, and that painful compromises must be made. It's been a year since we went to war with no choice. The Seven Fronts War, a complex and challenging war like no other, Galant said in his speech. Well, that's arguable. A war of no choice. You had a choice. You were given a choice. By who? By the people who started this war. Well, this recent escalation. Because the war began in 1948. But the recent round that led us to this moment began on the 7th of October. And the people who started that gave Israel an option immediately. They told them, we did this because, well, you didn't give us any other option. We don't really want to fight nor have war, but we don't get our rights by simply asking you. And we have people dying in prisons, and we have people suffering, people being killed every day, and we want a solution. And we're willing to stop this operation now if you can agree to a prisoner swap. It's primarily about the prisoners, but then it started to become about many other things up until we reached the stage that we're at. So even Galant, when he describes that, he is misleading the public by saying we had no other choice. And it's also a way to cover up the fact that many people who were sent to die in this war, this genocidal war, died for nothing but political ambitions and greed, in particular of Benjamin Netanyahu, but also the people around him. He continued, this year we were with our enemy and we created a different security reality around us, but the prices are heavy, very heavy. 898, that's the, recognized numbers. Victims were left in the hearts of the people. Good for our sons and daughters, the soldiers of the IDF and security forces who have fallen since the 7th of October until today. These are the fighters in the regular and the reservists, recruited and volunteers who charged with great courage and heroism without waiting for a call and order, when before their eyes stood the task to defend the state of Israel and its citizens. Throughout last year, the security establishment, the IDF at its head, turned the tide of the war and recorded unprecedented achievements in all sectors of combat. In the south, Hamas ceased to function as a military framework. Word laundry. In the north, Hezbollah continues to suffer a series of blows. The chain of command was eliminated, most of its rocket and missile power was destroyed, and its forces were beaten and retreated from the borderline. Again, all just comments to, undermine the levels of losses that are coming from Israel, and complete distortion of the actual reality that's happening. But he has to say that. He has to say that because he wants the people to swallow a very bitter pill soon, or, we're sensing that he's trying to make them swallow that pill. These two organizations, Hamas and Hezbollah, which have been prepared for years as a long arm against the state of Israel, are no longer an effective tool in the hands of Iran. Again, all of these statements are, of course, unsubstantiated, but all of them are there to justify something in the making, something that could be not very likely. However, clearly, if the defense minister is saying that, they're preparing something. Yeah, these important achievements create a change in the power relations between Israel and its enemies and allow us at the political level to realize the goals of the war and to make every decision from a position of strength and deterrence in order to reach a different reality in the Middle East. This is the place to point out that not every goal, it can only be achieved through military action. Force is not the end all. Is that Galant speaking, or is it someone else? When we come to fulfill our moral and ethical duty, to return the abducted to their homes, painful compromises are required. Galant added, we must do this for the abductees, for their families, for the fighters who fell in the name of this cause, for the legacy of the IDF, and in the name of the Jewish and national ethos. This is our responsibility. This is my responsibility as a Minister of Defense, as on the morning of the 7th of October, so throughout the year of the war, as for the significant achievements, also for the failures, the heavy prices, and the national challenges that we are committed to realizing. There is a very big reason that Yoav Galant is saying that now. Something is happening. Again, when it comes to the negotiations that happen in the background, they will have certain effects when it comes to statements we hear. That's coinciding with withdrawal of a brigade from North Gaza. That is coming with more and more talks coming in the background. Again, we're not hearing anything about any breakthrough. We're still seeing Benjamin Netanyahu with the same approach, opposing any ceasefire, and even the latest Egyptian proposal to try and ignite the ceasefire with a limited 48-hour ceasefire, during which Israelis who are kidnapped to Gaza would be released, and then Palestinians, of course, as well, to have that followed by 10 days, during which there will be talk about a substantial ceasefire. And also, we're hearing talks from Hamas. We're hearing talks from the particularly one of their representatives in Lebanon, Osama Hamdan, who said that there will be no one going back to Israel from Gaza unless we have a complete and full ceasefire and Israel withdraws from Gaza, of course, alongside the other conditions of Hamas. And again, he also pointed out a couple of things to do with the fighters and their mentality, and the fact that Israel does not understand the mentality of the people, mentioning that they were given options when it comes to the 7th of October. They were only notified in very short notice after the leadership told them, and that all of them decided to continue and liberate certain locations in the occupied territories, signaling that they are willing to continue fighting for years to come, and that they won't stop in any attempts of Israel to kneel down the Palestinians through these atrocities committed against the innocent civilians will not be working. But it's also a sign of weakness coming from Israel, not only due to the failure in Lebanon, but to the grave failure in Gaza, but also the big failure in Lebanon. When it comes to Lebanon, we had more revelations coming, in particular from Al-Akhbar, which is a Lebanese newspaper, about certain attempts from the US ambassador to Lebanon, saying that, our allies here, I'm trying to open the link here, it's not opening, but I'll tell you about it anyway if it does not open, about attempts from the US embassy in Lebanon to try and have a civil war in Lebanon. How? According to her, by telling the people that you need to go out to the streets and tell Hezbollah stop. And you need to go out to the streets and tell Hezbollah stop. Israel is killing them and striking them. And the US ambassador to Lebanon is asking the Lebanese to go and tell Hezbollah stop, not Israel, right? And according to certain reports, they've been having meetings with certain figures who are very well known in Lebanon, similar to the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas, who tied their fate with the US administration and with Israel. The people who succeeded the mass traitors who sold Lebanon and established a South Lebanon army to serve Israel. Some of them still exist in Lebanon and are willing to play in the hands of the US administration and Israel, and are still delusional to a level where they think that the resistance can somehow be beaten, right? But this is another proof that the United States administration does not act with genuine intent to reach any sort of ceasefire or settlement. The United States administration is still run by the mentality of the empire, of the militaristic oligarchy, a neo-colonialist mentality that only views the region as, factories and business and oil and, people as commodity, really. And, whenever there's hindrance, we just want to take them down and shut them down by genocide, by not genocide, whatever it is we want to do, we'll do it. But again, that's not something that is very likely to succeed. In particular, after Israel proved to the Lebanese, before anyone else, during their recent attacks, that they're not only targeting Hezbollah, they are targeting the Lebanese people. Likewise with Gaza. With Gaza, we had certain calls from Netanyahu himself and from other figures in the genocide army telling the people that, look, your leadership is now dead, and now you need to understand that there's a new era, and, we don't have a war with the people and what have you. Again, saying that and committing all of their atrocities simultaneously. It's like if you genuinely wanted to convince the people that you are a force of good or a genuine alternative to the people in power, then show it to them. The people cannot be just fooled that easily, especially when you're committing the worst genocide in the 21st century against these people. So they have the levels of delusions to try and convince the Lebanese people with the same things they try and convince the Palestinian people with, that we are here for the good, we're here to get rid of the problem, we're here to, create a new future that's better for you and your family, and if not, we have Israel to murder you. This is the tone that the US administration is coming with, and unfortunately there isn't anyone in the US administration that has had that moment of reflection really to change the view when it comes to the region and genuinely call for equality, for human rights, for democracy in the region. Now, we've seen a shift when it comes to countries that are traditional allies of Israel. But again, the level of influence and, of course, the level of power that the United States government has is not like any other Israeli ally. It's primarily the United States administration, and the fact that they are trying to have these civil war attempts in Lebanon and act as mediators at the same time is beyond ironic, beyond delusional. Likewise with the negotiations and talks about the ceasefire with Gaza. They are still playing the role of servants and protectors to Benjamin Netanyahu and the genocide state, and whitewashing their crimes to continue doing what they're doing, and again buying them time. And you're talking about a country that rejected the proposal of Joe Biden himself. They rejected UN Security Council resolutions. There were very generous offers on the table. However, Israel rejected all of them, and they continue with their denial, not only of Palestinian rights, but of Palestinians as people. And we're hearing more and more people in the Israeli government, decision makers, that there will never be any sort of Palestinian state. We will not allow any formation of a Palestinian state, neither in Gaza nor in the West Bank. As a matter of fact, they're talking about expulsion, they're talking about expansion, and they are clearly talking about the greater Israel. Which leads me to the next subject. Hezbollah just elected a new Secretary General. The new Secretary General is now Sheikh Naim Qasim. Naim Qasim was the Deputy Secretary General of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but he was one of the key founders of Hezbollah. Naim Qasim was the Deputy Secretary General of Sayyid Abbas Musawi in 1991, who was assassinated by Israel when they launched a missile at his personal car and killed him, his wife, and his daughter, knowingly and deliberately. Then he continued to act as a Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah from the early days, from the beginning of the days of the late Secretary General, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and of course to this day. There were many talks about the potential of Sayyid Hashim Safiuddin taking this position, but later Hezbollah confirmed that he indeed was assassinated by an Israeli strike in the southern suburb of Beirut, and now Sheikh Naim Qasim took this position. Again, he's one of the key founders of Hezbollah. He is a very active person in Lebanon. He's an author. He wrote many books, as much as 26 publications. He's had 8 of which about human rights in Islam, and jurisprudence as well. Very well rounded, very knowledgeable, and also a man who isn't taken away by the by the moment, as they say. He is very reasonable in his approach. And he also said to Israel in the beginning, if you think that by assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah or other leaders of Hezbollah, don't think that we will change anything when it comes to his approach. We will continue to have the same approach when it comes to the fighting. And they also released this statement here. They said, based on faith in God Almighty, commitment to the authentic Muhammadan Islam, adherence to Hezbollah's principles and goals, and in accordance with the approved mechanism for electing a Secretary General, Hezbollah's Shura Council agreed to elect His Eminence Sheikh Naim Qasim as Secretary General of Hezbollah, carrying the blessed banner in this journey, asking God Almighty to guide him in his noble mission, leading Hezbollah in the Islamic resistance. We pledge to God Almighty and to the spirit of our highest and most precious martyr, His Eminence Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, may God be pleased with him, and to the martyrs, the mujahideen of the Islamic resistance, and our steadfast, patient, loyal people, to work together to achieve Hezbollah's principles and the goals of its journey, and to keep the flame of resistance shining and its banner raised until victory is achieved and God is victorious over his affairs. God is strong and mighty. This was on Tuesday, the 29th, so that is today. Literally, they released that statement. Hezbollah released the statement to confirm that they indeed elected a new Secretary General. And again, seeing as, firstly, of course, they have mechanisms, Hezbollah, when it comes to their organization, seeing as they chose this figure, says a lot of things. Firstly, they are continuing the same path that they took before. They did not let or allow the massive blows in the form of assassinations of certain figures, leading figures, including the late Secretary General, to make them have certain moves that wouldn't necessarily be aligned with their traditional approach and deviate from the path that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah had previously, which was a very calculated, very strategic, and very much focused on the path that they are going and looking, of course, towards the future as well. Some people are, some observers will say that he is more kind of hard line when it comes to the military aspect and what have you. However, really, we haven't seen anything different when it comes to Sheikh Naim Qassem. Again, usually he's one of the more reasonable people. Not that we're talking about unreasonable people in general in the organization, but he has a very reasonable approach. He doesn't have anything significantly, that can be considered too radical or whatever, but he is continuing down the same path, and we are not expecting a massive shift when it comes to Hezbollah as an organization, nor their actions against Israel. So the current path of escalation that we are witnessing at the moment, including Hezbollah firstly having fierce resistance in South Lebanon and targeting wider areas inside the genocide entity, nothing is deviating even from the path of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, because from their perspective, they are viewing this as a long-term war. They're not viewing this as something short. They had a certain approach that they're not deviating from. And from their perspective, they know what hurts Israel the most. And they know that Israel cannot tolerate a war of attrition for a very long time. Because don't forget, these are the people who liberated Lebanon at the end of the day. Hezbollah led the front of resistance against the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. So they have a very long history with them. They expelled Israel in 2000, completed expelling them before that, and they still had very small areas that there's kind of a disagreement between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel around them, which are the Shib'a farms, but Lebanon considers them occupied by Israel, and from their perspective, if there is anything to do with these lands belonging to either Syria or Lebanon, that's something that they deal with internally, but they always use the Shib'a farms as a reason, because to them that's occupied Lebanese territory, occupied by a Zionist force, and we have the right to continue and resist Israel based on that, not just as a support for the Palestinian front. And again, from Hezbollah's perspective, their recent actions against Israel are representing the escalation that's coming on Lebanon. They're no longer just a supporting front for Gaza. They are at war with Israel. And although there have been talks, and there are still talks to try and reach a ceasefire, like we mentioned before, the United States ambassador to Lebanon, she's basically calling for a civil war and for people in Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. Why? Because Israel is failing to achieve anything. So it wants the Lebanese people to do the dirty work of the United States administration and the genocide forces. However, again, that's not likely to succeed. There are many reasonable voices in Lebanon, including people who actually oppose Hezbollah, that won't be led to another civil war, because civil war does not serve anyone. And civil war, although it will have certain sectarian elements in it, at the end of the day, you will have people from every sectarian or religious background fighting on each side, although many people would like to portray it as something else.